for anyone who finds out their inflammation is elevated, it's going to be a combination of reducing some things and being a yes to other things. I think about this, okay, what do we want to be a yes to? And what do we want to be a less to?
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am very excited to have an expert special guest in a topic that is a lot of interest for a lot of people. We have Dr. Jessie Hehmeyer. She is the physician founder of Well Empowered, where she practices data-driven, outcome-oriented functional medicine. She created Well Empowered with one commitment in mind, providing you the foundation of health and vitality that transforms your experience of life and alters what is possible for you. She is an expert in weight loss and doing it in a very sort of holistic, functional way. We're going to talk a lot about that. We're also going to talk about something else she's an expert in, which is gut health, digestive health, gas, bloating that a lot of people may experience. I'm sure many people will be interested in hearing what she has to say about that. Dr. H earned her Master's of Science in Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine from the University of Western States, Doctorate in Chiropractic Medicine from National University of Health Services, Bachelor of Arts from University of California, Los Angeles. She is an IFM certified practitioner, a licensed dietitian nutritionist, a certified nutrition specialist. And she has learned from physicians at the forefront of functional medicine, including Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Tom O'Brien. And prior to attending graduate school, she established herself as an expert in the fitness industry. So she has a long list of accolades. We'd be spending half the episode if I kept going on and on about them. So Dr. H, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Oh my goodness. It's such a pleasure to be here with you, Laura. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. And let's jump right into it. I know this is a hot topic. Many people are interested in weight loss, gut health. Many people experience bloating, gas, digestive issues. Let's start a little bit with the beginning of your journey and how you got so interested and became an expert in this work.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think like a lot of people in this work, it started very personally for me, right? So for me, it started with my own health experience and my own health challenges and struggles. And, to say a little bit more about that, with the hope that your listeners hear something in my experience that's useful for them. It was in my late 20s after I'd opened up this, strength training facility in Chicago and had been struggling with my weight for over a decade, about a dozen years or so. I grew up dancing. So for me, it kind of got on my radar on the younger side. And it was really born, my love of this work and my love of guiding people to master their relationship with their body and with food and arrive at a place where they feel their best and they look their best, was born of my own experience and really getting that my own struggles in this area were a barrier to me being my best, to me being fully present to the love and the wonder and the joy in my life, and to me fully contributing in a way that I'm deeply devoted to. And when I got that, it really became a turning point in my journey, right? I started to shift how I was relating to this area of my life. I did what I call it ditching the all or nothing approach. So I started to step away from the inherited paradigm and began to step into a whole new era that I like to call mastering your middle ground. So for this new journey for me, there are a few things about it. One is it was born of self-love rather than self-aggression, and it was grounded in science, right? I started really studying the body at a level I hadn't before, at a new level. And then ultimately, inside of my devotion to be able to guide people on their journey, I went to graduate school knowing that my body's not the same as your body, right? So whether it's around weight or digestion or energy or skin, everybody, the symptoms may be the same, but the source of the symptom is undoubtedly different. And so that's ultimately how I arrived at what I do today.
Amazing. I love how you're balancing the actual science with also kind of a love-based approach we recently interviewed a 102-year-old doctor on this podcast, Dr. McGarry, and she was basically talking about how the love and how when she was a child and her parents were doctors in India and they had basically no medicine and no tools, but they were basically spreading love and healing with different approaches and with whatever means they had. So really love that.
It's so beautiful. Yeah, so beautiful. Yeah, high vibration goes a long way in the healing process.
I think a lot of people really miss that. I think a lot of people really miss that part and don't realize that there is a mental aspect, there is a energetic aspect to healing, to health, and it's really interesting. I do want to ask you about, so what's this middle ground that you're talking about, right? So I think there's all or nothing. And for some people, it's kind of, I don't know, maybe it's easier to go all or nothing, but for many people, it may not be. So curious to hear about your middle ground.
Yeah, well, I would say all or nothing is easier because it's the default inherited approach, right? People know how to do something like Whole30, and they also know how to do day 31, like having a big pizza and a bottle of wine. They know how to do that, right? And so, all or nothing is really defined by overindulgence, which is different than indulgence. So overindulgence and deprivation. These are the two extremes people dance between. And so, it's what most people have been handed in this area of their life. And so it really does take a whole new approach, a whole different perspective, and a real devotion to something new and something that really provides a level of freedom that isn't possible in the all or nothing approach, right? All or nothing approach, it cycles back and forth, all or nothing, all or nothing, all or nothing, overindulgence, deprivation, right? And the middle ground, right? That's when people are able to, through the use of science, right? Like, yes, high vibration is really foundational, but we do also want to use science in conjunction with that to inform what actions are going to move you forward and are going to allow you to produce the outcomes you care about the most. And in that middle ground world, you begin to learn how to intelligently bend so you don't break, right? And it is an approach that is born of self-love, right? All or nothing is the aggression, the self-aggression, and the middle ground is really born of self-love.
I love that. Yeah, I really love that. And I think that's an important distinction of kind of going too much on the extremes as well, right? Like depriving yourself, where I see so many people who are like, I'm going to lose weight by just limiting my calories and depriving myself. And then of course, then they're gorging on the other time versus other situations. I think based on, at first, when you said middle ground, I thought, I'm probably one of the all or nothing guys, but actually when you explained it, I realized, you know what, I'm not an extreme. I don't deprive myself. I'm not counting calories. I'm pretty much always satiated. But because I'm putting good, healthy nutrition, food in my body, I don't really get these crazy ups and downs that you'll see. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fabulous. That is so great.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, weight loss and a lot of these gut health, digestive, bloating, gas. I think some of it might be interrelated, but let's maybe start a little bit on the weight loss side and talk about what is the approach that you use or are teaching to your patients?
Yeah, well, so the first thing that I'd say is the approach is customized for the individual in front of me. And it's customized based on, yes, data, like lab work, science, the things we see there, as well as who that individual is, how they live their lives. One of the things that I invite people to consider when they're contemplating, for example, the cadence of their eating. By cadence, I mean intermittent fasting versus not. That's a pretty easy example there. One question I pose to people is, do you believe that is sustainable for you and your life? And if the answer is no, then to me, it's not a solution. If it's not a sustainable action, then the outcomes aren't going to be sustainable. So it's just not a solution if it's not sustainable, because I'm in it for you to win it. I'm in it for you to not just produce outcomes short term, but really be able to produce outcomes consistently over time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what does that approach consist of in terms of, I know it's going to be different for each person, but is it typically like a very strict, nutrition plan with a certain amount of calories you can take in, or what's a little bit more?
No, I'm totally with you, Talor. I do not ask people to count calories. No, I do not do that. Really, we start with, so first of all, we're gathering information so that we can understand what's at the source of their body's barrier to losing weight, right? All day long, I have people show up at my virtual front door and say something like, I'm eating healthy, I'm working out, and I'm not losing weight. Or, I'm doing all the things I used to do that used to work for me losing weight, and they're not working anymore. What the heck, right? And so whatever the case may be, there is a reason. There is an explanation. And so the information we start to look at is, we start to look at labs, right? We start to look for, are there hidden sources of, your slowed metabolism or weight loss resistance? And I'll just speak to a couple common ones that I find.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I hate to break hearts, but it's just often not the thyroid. It's like almost never the thyroid. And I know people want it to be the thyroid because it just sounds like, well, I could fix that, right? I could just take medication and it would be handled, right? And the thing is, even when it is your thyroid, because of course I always do a very comprehensive assessment of the thyroid, not just a one number kind of gal, but even if your thyroid does require support, I've never yet encountered a person who's struggling with their weight or with their energy or even with, hormonal fluctuations where their thyroid is playing a role. I've never yet encountered someone where it's the only answer. In other words, supporting the thyroid appropriately will be essential, but that alone won't produce the outcome, right? And so we want to look at, okay, what are the other things that play a big role in someone's health, that play a big role in a slowed down metabolism, for example? And in this case, a few common things that I see, one is elevated inflammation. And to say a little bit more about elevated inflammation, oftentimes someone will show up and say, oh my gosh, I'm so inflamed. And I'll ask them, okay, how's it showing up on your body? And they might say, my joints hurt, or I'm bloated, or my skin's red. They'll say whatever they have to say. But more often than not, there are no symptoms of inflammation. Or perhaps there are no perceived symptoms of inflammation, because I would say weight loss resistance is a symptom of elevated inflammation, right? So when we actually do the labs, we can measure inflammation, and there are a few different numbers I look at. HSCRP is a common one I look at, which stands for high sensitivity C-reactive protein. That's a go-to one. Homocysteine is another one that I look at. And there are a few other things as well. But those are some common ones I look at to see answer the question, is inflammation in the way of your ability to lose weight? And if it is, the tides aren't really going to change until we address that inflammation. I actually did my master's thesis on this subject, and it's really amazing the way the body, when there's inflammation, it thinks it's in the healing process. And so it wants to use all of its calories to help the body heal. It's supposed to do that, right? If you think about, thousands of years ago, someone actually injuring themselves, right? Like in the forest, they're foraging for food and they injure themselves so much that they can't make it back to where their community is located. Well, hopefully their metabolism is going to slow down so that they can use the calories they have stored a little bit longer. And part of that will happen via the inflammatory process, right? So, it's really very genius of our biology to operate like that. But if inflammation is elevated inappropriately, we're going to need to address it before your metabolism can shift. So, yeah.
That's a great distinction. And it's really right in alignment with everything that I say. Whenever I speak somewhere and they ask me to, talk about health, I say, look, here's what I want you to think about, is that health is about lowering inflammation in the body first and foremost, right? Every major disease comes from inflammation. I didn't know that even weight loss can be hindered by inflammation, which makes total sense. Most of the same foods that cause inflammation are the same ones that will also cause you to gain weight. So, no coincidence there. And I really think that so many issues. I think that I've actually said this before, and this might be a bit of a stretch, but I think there's tons of people who have had back surgery, knee surgery, shoulder surgery, when really, if they could have just lowered the inflammation in their body, that pain may have gone away and they may not have even needed surgery. So yeah, I think this is a really, really important topic here. And I'm really glad you're bringing it up. And so it's interesting because HSCRP is one that's a common marker on many blood tests. I know one time when I did a really hard leg workout the day before my blood test, and then my HSRP was higher on that too, right? So maybe that's an important thing. Don't do a crazy hard weight training workout the day before your blood test, right?
Well, do you remember how high it was, if you don't mind sharing?
I don't remember. I wish I would certainly share. I don't remember the exact number, honestly. I mean, I could pull it up. It would take a few minutes. I don't want to.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah, definitely. There can be things that cause an oddball, kind of give us a number that's not an actual reflection of your inflammatory status. Another thing that can happen is if people aren't sick, but a day later they get sick. The inflammatory process could already be ramping up, but then we just ask that, right? I ask someone if inflammation is elevated, I will ask them, was anyone in your household sick? Did you feel like you were coming down with a cold? And, I'll take that into account when I'm, considering what our next best step is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Very interesting. So what are the common causes then? So kind of piggybacking off of inflammation could be causing people to not lose weight. And by the way, this is actually very interesting because someone very close to me actually literally just eliminated wine and eliminated gluten, and without trying lost 15 pounds in less than 2 months, literally without trying, not doing anything different in their workout routine or anything like that. And they weren't even really overweight, by most people's standards. So it's pretty incredible just to see how little changes like that, eliminating gluten and alcohol, for example, which I think are pretty inflammatory things. So she probably lowered inflammation in her body and drastically lost the weight. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I think you're totally spot on, Laura. I think that's exactly what was going on. And it really is it never, even though I do this work, every day, it just never ceases to amaze me how spectacular our bodies are, their ability to heal, their ability to respond. And it's, that's a great example right there. So yes, in terms of, inflammation, definitely one of the common root causes of weight loss struggles. Other ones that come to mind, one is suboptimal insulin sensitivity, which is different than impaired insulin sensitivity, right? So the lab has a pretty big range of what they'll call lab normal, fasting insulin. It will go up to 18, 19 for your fasting insulin. I really, really want to see your fasting insulin at 7 or less, right? That's a big, big difference. And if that fasting insulin is creeping up, that is definitely a sign that, your metabolism is being negatively impacted by that. So that's certainly something we would address if that were something we learned from your labs. The third common, unacknowledged source of weight loss struggles is what I like to call gunked up detox pathways, very technical term. And, these are all related, by the way. It's not like these live, one without the other. Oftentimes they occur together. But when detox pathways aren't working smoothly, then we find increased exposure to toxins, which affects insulin sensitivity and increases inflammation. And, affects your body's ability to actually produce energy, biologically known as ATP, right? So when our detox pathways aren't working smoothly, it's going to affect our hormonal function, our hormones themselves, because our hormones actually get processed through our detox pathways too, even though we more commonly think of detox pathways only for, pollution or pesticides and stuff like that. No, we actually detox, so to speak, our hormones that we produce naturally in our body as well. So all these things can work together to create a situation where your body's on this kind of hamster wheel of physiology that's just not working in its favor. And once we identify what's at the source of weight loss struggles and begin to address them and start to make some shifts, It's just, like we were saying earlier with your friend, how quickly we see these shifts, and, eliminating alcohol, even if she wasn't even drinking that much, her body may have just been a little bit more sensitive, or maybe her detox pathways weren't working as smoothly, given by a lot of different factors, whether it's nutrient deficiencies or microbiome changes. All kinds of things can cause that. So yeah, it's the body does really respond once we get down to business. Yes.
Very interesting. You mentioned about insulin resistance and fasting insulin, and these are numbers I've seen on my blood test. I more look at, I think I never really fully understood them. So I kind of look at the HbA1c because it's more of a straightforward number. But can you explain a little bit for people who may have had a blood test and have seen HbA1c, fasting insulin, and insulin resistance, and which you feel is kind of the most important there?
Yeah, they're all important. I do them all. Your fasting glucose, your fasting insulin, your hemoglobin A1C. Yes. And to say a little bit more about each of those, sometimes I will find one number abnormal and the rest are normal, which is to say, if we only did two, and, it's not always the same one, right? One person, their fasting glucose is fine. Their hemoglobin A1C is great. Their fasting insulin's a little wonky, or it's on the higher end of normal. And it's like, ding, 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 something's going on there, right? So to say a little bit more about, okay, what exactly are these things, right? Your fasting glucose is helping us understand what your blood sugar, also known as your glucose, right? What your blood sugar levels are like. That can be abnormally elevated for a lot of different reasons, whether it's a nutrient deficiency or given by nutritional habits, or stress can be a cause of elevated fasting glucose. So a lot of different things can be at the source of that. Other thing, if we turn our attention to hemoglobin A1C is fundamentally, it is sugar stuck to red blood cells is what we're looking at. And the reason why that's a useful number is because red blood cells live in our body for about 120 days, which is relatively long when it comes to cells floating around in our bloodstream. And so it tells us, okay, over the course of their 120-day lifespan, approximately, how much sugar have they been hanging out with? Have they been hanging out with a lot of sugar or a little bit of sugar? And when I say sugar, I'm not just talking about sweets, right? I'm also talking about simple carbohydrates like white rice or pasta or bread or white potatoes. These are all things that function the same way as that, sugary dessert that is sugar in your body, same impact. So that's what hemoglobin A1C is. So that can be a really useful metric. It can be off if someone is anemic. So, right, if you have low iron and you, as a result, or B12 or folate, and as a result, you have low red blood cells, that can impact your hemoglobin A1C. So we always want to look at all these together to understand your body's truth. And then we have fasting insulin. So insulin is a hormone that is produced by our pancreas, and its job is to act as an escort. So insulin, when we eat carbohydrate and we begin to digest it and absorb it, it's glucose in our bloodstream. So we start to absorb that glucose. And insulin's job is to, if we personify insulin, to walk over to glucose and grab glucose by its sticky little hand and walk it over to a cell door and knock on that cell door. And then the cell door is supposed to open up and welcome in that glucose. So insulin sensitivity, decrease in insulin sensitivity happens when the insulin knocks on the cell door and the cell door is either slower to respond or doesn't respond at all. Now that would be more like a diabetic state if it's not really responding, but slower to respond is kind of what we're talking about here, right? So when the cell is slower to open up and let that glucose in, that tells us it's resistant to the cue, so to speak, of insulin. It's a little bit like if I came over to your house, Talor, and I rang your doorbell and just kept ringing it for the next 2 days. At a certain point, you wouldn't hear it anymore. You would just block it out. It would be background noise. And that's kind of what cells do when it comes to insulin.
Got it. Interesting. You mentioned, I do want to talk a little bit about, for those listening, they might be like, all right, so what do I eat to lower my inflammation? And you kind of hinted at a couple of things there that are very interesting in terms of potatoes and pasta and even white rice as being kind of similar to sugars in terms of what they can do to your HbA1c, your glucose levels. So what is your general, if someone does have high inflammation, what are some of the things that you'll advise them in terms of nutrition?
So yeah, in terms of nutrition, sugar is public enemy number one. It just is, right? Yeah. So whether it's clearly sugary things or it's the simple non-sugary carbohydrates like the white rice and the pasta and the bread or the pretzels, stuff like that, or it's alcohol, right? These are all different forms of sugar. So for anyone who finds out their inflammation is elevated, it's going to be a combination of reducing some things and being a yes to other things. I think about this, okay, what do we want to be a yes to and what do we want to be a less to? And also, I'm a big believer that everyone's journey is unique. The important thing is that you come to your journey with a real commitment to your health and vitality, a commitment to honor your health as sacred. I really do see people's journey and their health as a sacred journey. And, you know, is there any more beautiful expression of your love of this life than doing what you're able to do to care for your body and care for your health and care for your well-being? And so with that, part of it is being really kind because things don't happen overnight, right? So when I work with people, I think about it like crossing the monkey bars of change. And you know how long your arms are. I don't. So we'll talk about, you know, what are next possible steps, but we want these to be steps that are both going to be useful for you in your health journey, but also attainable, right? There are some people who I start working with who their next step is simply counting how many grams of sugar they're getting in a day, right? And they might come back and, you know, I work off of a shared tracker. And so I'm in and out of their tracker and I'm seeing, okay, good for them. They're counting. They are actually looking at the truth and they're coming up with 80 grams of sugar, 90 grams of sugar, 70 grams of sugar, whatever it is. It's okay. The first thing we need to start doing is really just seeing the truth before we can start to affect the truth. So I say that in light of really encouraging people to honor where they are and look at what their next best step is if this occurs as an area of opportunity.
Yeah. So for people who do eat a lot of carbs right now, let's say a lot of sugar, a lot of carbs, what would you recommend they replace that with? Is it obvious? I mean, we're obviously protein and fats are, you know, most people think about protein, fats, and carbs. So is the general, if you have higher inflammation, higher HbA1c or glucose levels, is the general path then to lower carbs and increase maybe protein and fat a little bit?
Possibly, but also I think about the quality of the protein, right? Because I know there are some people out there who say it doesn't matter what kind of protein you're eating. You can eat red meat every day. And the truth is, I've never seen that be true in labs. I've never seen it be true. So I'm not saying it's not true for you, but you want to get labs to see if it's true. You would be the oddball. I've not yet seen it, right? So we want to be mindful of the total amount of red meat. I'm not anti-red meat. I eat red meat myself. When possible, I encourage choosing, you know, a grass-fed, you know, grazing red meat, so to speak, cow. But also, you know, the total amount of red meat in a week does matter. And fried foods, you know, whether it's fried chicken or whatever the case might be, right? Those things are going to promote inflammation also. So that is, you know, those are capturing the less, but in the way of like, okay, great. What do you eat? Quality, you know, omega-3 rich proteins and lean proteins, omega-3 rich proteins primarily being the whole seafood fish world, lean proteins being poultry world mostly, and then our mono and polyunsaturated fats, which are things like avocado and guacamole and nuts and seeds and flax and chia and all those great things, olives and olive oil. But yes, I do want people eating carbohydrates. I just want them to be eating carbohydrates that are really doing something awesome for their body. And those are going to fall into a couple of different camps. One, we have all things vegetables, right? Especially the non-starchy vegetables, but really minus the white potato. I'll take just about any vegetable on your plate, right? Mm-hmm. And so, colorful vegetables, definitely, those are carbs and they give your body so many nutrients, so many antioxidants. Love those. And then we have our higher fiber whole grains, things like black rice, which, I feel like I should be the national spokesperson for black rice because I'm such a huge fan. Black rice, not only does it have more fiber than brown and white rice, but it actually has the same antioxidant that blueberries have. So you're getting antioxidants from your rice, which is like such a win. And most people really like black rice. So it's not even like a compromise.
I've never heard of black rice. I've never heard of black rice.
Yes,
this is
black
the first
rice.
time I'm hearing about it.
Yes. And sometimes it's called forbidden rice, but fundamentally speaking, if you look at it and it's black rice, right? So sometimes you'll even see it called purple rice, which makes sense when you cook it because the water looks a little purple. So yeah, big fan of black rice. And then, lentils, beans, things that are, high fiber legumes, big fan of those too. So I'm definitely not anti-carbohydrate at all. I'm pro nutrient dense foods.
Yes. I certainly agree. And I'm not like trying to limit carbs either, but it just so happens that I don't eat bread, pasta. I personally haven't even eaten rice really much because I kind of followed the paleo when I was 10 years ago when I lowered inflammation in my body. I kind of just followed the anti-inflammatory paleo diet, which was no rice. And so actually it's an interesting segue here with regards to beans and lentils, which you just mentioned, and in going into digestive issues and gut health, because that's a whole controversial topic in many people's eyes. But I'd love to hear, you've seen many results, you've worked with many patients, you've seen many blood test results. And in terms of, so let's kind of transition a little bit into some of the other topics you focus on, which is bloating and gas, constipation, gut health issues. Do you find, and again, it's very interesting because I've probably half of the people, we've only had a few conversations about this, maybe 4 or 5 on this podcast, but I think half the people were like, no beans. Beans are bad for your gut. Beans are not good for you. They're legumes. And then the other half are like, beans are amazing. They're actually good for your gut. They're high protein. So I'm curious what side you are on. You might break a tiebreaker here.
Yeah. Well, I'm on the side that works for the individual in front of me. So that means that it's not always one solution.
Yeah.
But I'll give you a little more information about that, right? So there are definitely, especially when it comes to, in my experience, well, actually it could be bloating, diarrhea, or constipation, any one of these. Some of the people who have bloating, diarrhea, or constipation, they have what's known as SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And in those people, beans are probably not their friend at this moment in time. Some people, they'll never be their friend, just kind of how it is, right? It's just SIBO is, it's a toughie. We can definitely heal the gut. And more often than not, we can find a place where people have more bend in their diet than, crazy strictness and unsustainable nutritional shifts. But sometimes those challenging nutritional shifts, when we're dealing strictly with digestive challenges, are important initially to support the healing process. So for someone who has these symptoms and we find out, these symptoms, the source of these symptoms are given by SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We can find that out via tests. We find that out, then it's pretty likely I'm going to recommend at least some version of what's called the low FODMAP diet. I won't go down that rabbit hole right now, but when possible, I like to not do a complete low FODMAP diet because it's so restrictive. Sometimes we do have to go that restrictive. Often we don't, though. I will say, probably, 20% of the time, if someone has SIBO, we have to go that restrictive. So fortunately, most of the time we don't have to go that restrictive, but definitely there's going to be some foods that people with SIBO are going to be best avoiding, at least for the short term. And beans are a common culprit. They're a high FODMAP food. Now, if we find out that the source of their digestive distress is because they don't have enough good bacteria in their large intestines, right? If we find that out, then one of the things we're going to want to do, besides maybe do some probiotic work with some spore-based probiotics in particular that are very good at not just introducing microbes, but acting as fertilizer. So those microbes can make a home in your large intestines. We want to make sure you're feeding those good bugs. And those good bugs eat fiber. That is what they eat. So yes, we can get them from vegetables, but we like a combination of different types of fiber. And so beans can play an important role in that. So it really does depend on what's at the source of the digestive tract woes, whether I'm going to advocate or discourage consumption of beans and legumes.
That sounds like the correct answer. That's I like that answer. Would you? This is an interesting question. Maybe TMI for some people, but I'm actually curious for my own knowledge. Like, if you eat something and then you do get gassy or feel bloated after, is that something people should pay attention to and be aware of? You know, let's say they're doing a protein shake and they're slamming 50 grams of protein in there, and then they're farting for 2 hours after, right? Is that a sign that, hey, maybe we should try a different protein or try less protein? Should people start paying attention to that?
Yes. Great question. And nothing like that's ever TMI for me. But definitely. I mean, your body is communicating something. Something's not working, right? Mm-hmm. And it could be as simple as, just like you said, maybe your body's reacting to an ingredient in that protein shake. And that happens with some frequency, right? One of my favorite things to do is, sometimes people come to me and they're not taking any supplements. And sometimes one of the things people want in our work together is like a supplement audit of sorts. And I love doing that, not only because we find actionable information, but I also have the opportunity to educate people, right? I can give people, I'll screen share and I'll say, okay, this is what your body's reacting to in this supplement. And so that means you can take that with you out there in the world forevermore. And when you're looking for a new protein powder, for example, make sure it doesn't have these ingredients, because that's what's at the source of your gassiness for hours afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. But, of course, it could be caused by other things. Maybe they're not producing enough digestive enzymes, and we can test for that. Or maybe it is like a SIBO kind of situation and they're eating a high FODMAP food, and so they're reacting to it. But yeah, definitely. If someone is getting super bloaty after drinking or eating something, it is worthy of notice and worthy of action.
Yeah, it's something I certainly pay attention to. If I eat something and then I'm gassy or bloated after, I say, especially because I eat, in my opinion, very, very clean. So it's like, if something does that to me, to my stomach, I say, okay, wait a minute. Like, that's interesting. And then if it happens again, then it's like, okay, this is confirmation that this wasn't just a one-off thing, and I probably should change something here. So I think it's really important. I don't think a lot of people do that enough, really paying attention to the signals that your body is giving you after you eat certain foods.
Definitely. And even just in this whole digestive world, I think it's so funny. Sometimes I'll be working with someone and they'll come to see me for, let's just say their menstrual cycle's wacky, or they have acne or joint pain, just something not related to digestion. And as we're talking, I'll ask them about their digestion, and I'll ask them, okay, how many days, I've learned to say this, how many days a week or times a day do you have a bowel movement? And sometimes people will say, about 3 times. I'm like, 3 times a day? No, 3 times a week. I'm like, 3 times a week, but they actually didn't even come to me for constipation, because in their mind, that's how their bodies worked, their whole life. At some point, maybe their doctor said, oh, that's just normal for you. But it's not. There is something at the source of it. What it is, I don't know, but that's my job. We figure it out, right? But yes, I think all things digestive are really worthy of noticing, because our digestive tract plays such an important role in our health. Whether we're absorbing nutrients appropriately, our immune system, there's the brain-gut connection that plays a role in our mental health and well-being. Just so much happens in our gut, and we want to notice if there's something amiss.
Yes, for sure. And I know we only got a few minutes left, but I know you've also helped a lot of people with skin issues. And is that through the same mechanism of gut health, lowering inflammation, or is there typically something different when it comes to skin issues?
It's usually a combination of things. So with skin issues, it's often a food sensitivity. So food sensitivities are different than allergies. They're delayed reactions and can take up to 72 hours to show up. And the nature of the way the body's reacting with a food sensitivity means that just reducing the food isn't enough, right? We actually need to really identify the source of the reaction and remove it entirely. For ideally, some places will say, 3 months. I find that typically 2 months really gets the job done. So we want to identify what the culprit is, be diligent about removing it. And we also want to do some gut support because absolutely when someone is reacting to a food, part of the reason they're reacting is given by what's called, the term we'd use here casually is a leaky gut. The fancy term is increased intestinal permeability. But the point being is that your gut is playing a role in that reaction. So we want to help the gut heal. Sometimes, absolutely, a disruption in the microbiome is playing a role in skin challenges. And of course, there can be products people are using on their face that even though maybe they did a product overhaul and they've been using clean products, just because they're, organic or, all natural doesn't mean your skin's not reacting to them. And typically it's a combination of things. So commonly it is a food sensitivity. Commonly it is something your skin's reacting to. And maybe with the side of, microbiome disruption as well.
Mm-hmm. So a food sensitivity test, are these finger prick food sensitivity tests? I've heard differing opinions about them. And in general, I'm always a little suspicious about finger prick tests. I'm like, are you really getting enough blood to make informed decision from a finger prick test? When, sometimes when I get all these markers pulled, one time I got 28 vials of blood pulled from my arm when I wanted to test every single marker available. I'm like, how is a finger prick gonna give information? But I'm curious your thoughts.
I agree with you completely, Talor. Completely. I don't use finger prick tests. I played with them a little bit at one point, but at the end of the day, I just decided they weren't accurate enough. So I do use a blood draw test. And I don't always, even when it comes to skin stuff, I don't always turn to a food sensitivity test. Sometimes just by having someone track, I can figure out the likely culprits and we can save them money and we can get the ball rolling faster. So sometimes it's just, I'll talk to someone about the possible ways of proceeding. And I really invite the people who I partner with to be a part of their plan, right? We are partners in your journey, right? It is a collaborative endeavor, your healing process. So I'll let people know, okay, we could do this test, but also if you give me just a couple of weeks, I think I might be able to figure it out. If you're tracking, I think we can skin the cat that way. Now, sometimes I do find a food sensitivity test useful, and then we'll do that if that's the case.
Great. Well, Dr. H, this has been incredible. Really, really love your approach. And I think I highly recommend people who are having any kind of issue, whether it be gut issues losing weight when they think that they're doing all the right things, but they're still not losing weight, gas, bloating, constipation. I know you also work with people's skin issues, like we mentioned, autoimmune issues. Highly recommend that people work with someone like you who really will do the right tests and really get down to the root cause of the issue and really find that out. And I can't tell people enough how much your life will change when you actually feel the way that you're supposed to feel again. Where can people learn more, follow you, maybe connect and work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So for your audience, I have a few different offers. So one, you can find me at wellempowered.com. And if you go to wellempowered.com, just know that you have the opportunity to win a free functional medicine test if you enter your information and join our newsletter. Also, if you'd like to explore working together, you can schedule a complimentary virtual 30-minute consultation. Make sure you let me know that you heard about Well Empowered from this conversation, because you will be granted 10% off if you do decide to work together. And you can find me on Instagram at Well Empowered.
Perfect. Amazing. Nice and easy. At Well Empowered, wellempowered.com. Highly recommend people check it out. Dr. H, this has been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we can do it again soon.
It would be a pleasure. Thank you so much, Talora. It's been great being with you and your community.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, can you please leave us a rating or review and subscribe? I've realized that while we have actually increased our downloads a lot, we're actually getting a lot of downloads, which I'm really happy about. We actually have very few ratings. And I realized that I've never asked people really to rate much. So I'm asking you now if you could please rate and review and subscribe. And if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to anyone that you think will get value out of this. Also, if you haven't checked out our line of products at buypeakperformance.com, you get 20% off your first order. That's www.buypeakperformance.com. We have some incredible products, including our organic high-altitude coffee. If you don't know this, coffee is one of the most heavily sprayed with pesticides out of any crop. So it's really important that you drink organic coffee. We've gone above and beyond to source what we believe is the highest quality and healthiest organic coffee in the world. We're also famous for our organic green superfood powder. You can get 20% off of that as well at buypeakperformance.com. We also have an organic vegan and paleo plant protein. See, most of the vegan proteins out there are using brown rice protein, which is really not a good source of protein, and it's also a grain. And if you're paleo, you know that grains tend to cause inflammation in some cases for some people. And so we wanted to make one that was paleo friendly and vegan and organic. We made an amazing amino acid profile, so it's really one of the best plant proteins for muscle building. So you can check out Peak Performance Organic Plant Protein. You can find that on our website. Of course, all our products are on Amazon as well. So thanks again. And again, please, if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to someone who you feel can get value out of it. And please leave us a rating, review, and subscribe. Thank you.